everyone, JJ here again. Talking today about one of my favorite albums. Probably one of yours too, if you enjoy heavy metal. The importance of this album, as I kind of sit and look at it and think about where and when it came into my life, is you have your kind of your moments where things take off, and you're exposed to something and it's with you for the rest of the time, sort of thing. And I had heard of this band, the band Metallica. If you haven't heard of them, the band Metallica. I had some older siblings, and Metallica at this time, it'd be 1988, somewhere around in there. And, they had Master Puppets, brought them a little bit of notoriety, and, they started making a name for themselves. And likely at some point, just through my older siblings, I'd probably heard something off of Master Puppets, but I was only, 6, 7 years old, something like that. And not really aware, listening to music on the radio and singing along to songs and things. But my musical awareness kind of hadn't really, flourished or developed or anything like that. And so 1988, hanging out with my brother a lot, and we're kind of listening to music together. I'm listening to what he's listening just by proxy. He's got his tastes, and I don't have much of mine yet. So I'm getting a lot of exposure to music through him. And Metallica was at the time his favorite band, and this album ends up coming along, and it wasn't so much when the album was first released, but my first exposure to drumming, and kind of, I mentioned in another video about Lars Ulrich, the drummer of Metallica. My first kind of ever inkling that I had that I wanted to play drums was after I saw the music video for One. And I don't remember exactly the year that I would have seen it, but obviously the video comes out around the same time as the album does. So somewhere in that 1988 to 1989 vicinity, somewhere around there, it comes to me. I'm taking it in and listening to it, and seeing the video, and start realizing drums are pretty cool. And so this album in particular holds a pretty special place. It's not my favorite Metallica album, and there's no reason for that. It's just that I think Ride the Lightning is the greatest heavy metal album, of all, almost. I love Ride the Lightning, and it's funny because it's Ride the Lightning came much later in my discovery of Metallica. Initially it was, this album was the newest one, so we listened to this the most, and then really liking this one, starting to work my way back. Master Puppets is the next in line. That's probably the next most accessible record from Metallica at that time. And then it wasn't until perhaps I started buying my own CDs that I really got into Ride the Lightning, and in the early 90s. And that album has really, really become my favorite. But this one, and Justice for All, has the might be the most impactful release, or the most impactful album in my life, musically speaking. And music is such a huge, important part of my life that I can't help but think of this as kind of a catalyst moment, or a spark to the flame, or a spark to the kindling to get the flame going, sort of thing. And it was kind of like everything about this album was kind of the right time, the right place. The music video for One being very kind of striking, and really telling a tale and being captivating, and you get to see the band playing. And part of Metallica's appeal, to me anyways, was just the band itself too. They were such endearing guys, such powerful performers as well. they had this like just this unity and this like fierceness and all these euphemisms for that kind of thing. But you could feel it, and it translates into the music video from One. And so having that visual in mind, and then listening to this album with my brother, like probably even like stealing his copy to listen to when he wasn't around. Sorry, but that's what younger brothers are for, right? So just taking this in, and the artwork was just such a compelling, like like the story is all in the front if you want the kind of themes of the albums. This isn't really like a concept record so much, but it definitely has a theme throughout the whole thing, which is justice, and there's some elements of war that are on there, and some really really intriguing concepts. Metallica never really delved much into the concept album territory, but probably in the grand scheme of things, this might be as close as they got. Especially the length of the songs, the length of the album. It's a double album. Like there's 2 records in here. The length of it was probably pushing the limits of technology back then, but Metallica was not one for self-editing. Sometimes it could be. I love it. Don't get me wrong, but some of the songs get a bit long in the tooth, and that's coming straight from the members' own mouths themselves. So. But yeah, just checking this record out. I can get to the playing on this record. In the history of heavy metal, I think this album. There's definitely a couple albums that come out before this that have the kind of sound that heavy metal ended up adopting. Like the guitars and the mid-range kind of like a scooped mid-range for the guitars. These very aggressive sounds, insanely dry production. I don't know if they got scared of reverb after Ride the Lightning or what happened, but they went the opposite route with this thing. This thing is dry as a bone. The drums are just like in your face. Like it's such a. If you think about it in context at the time, this just goes against the grain as far as like Bon Jovi records or Dawkins records even, like those records were kind of like swimming in ambience, and this was just like this in your face, like dry as a bone, bare bones, and I guess in hindsight it's kind of like that's Metallica's essence in a way too. Not over embellishing anything visually with the band. It's just like they're there to do business sort of thing, and it was a hugely influential album for me. Getting exposed to like the artwork from Pusshead, and some of the t-shirt designs that went along with this era and stuff like that. The Harvester of Sorrow shirt, and I still have my my white and Justice for All t-shirt that Lars was famously wearing in the music video. But getting back to this album, it's like just over and over. I didn't have a lot of CDs to kind of listen to, so this one I listened to all the time and just picked it apart. And I was 8 years old, let's say, and just learning about drums and trying to understand what was going on was something else, because this wasn't really like your AC/DC records or something simple. This was a lot more complex to take in, and is trying to learn this as a young, inexperienced drummer was I'm not really even sure how I went about it. It was just almost kind of like a dogged determination that I wanted to learn this. And it's almost kind of like, people talk about sometimes learning a second language and literally just like immersing themselves by watching nothing but television in that language or something, and just being surrounded by it all the time. And I think that's honestly like kind of how drumming came to me in a way. just a dogged determination that this was like, seeing Lars in the video playing, hearing what he was playing. It was just something I felt a compulsion to have to learn it, and to have to try to replicate it, and not seeing any video at the time or anything like that. Sitting and listening to this album over and over again is what really cemented how I still learn songs to this day, which is mostly by ear, 90% of the time. The odd time I will look up a video to learn a certain passage, or I would reference the drum tablature the odd time. And sometimes I still don't get it right, even, by ear is kind of a loose way to interpret things sometimes, but I've always felt as if I'm in the wheelhouse, I'm doing okay. This listening to this album and just how I had to go about learning it, and without really being able to access a drum set, I had to just use my imagination and imagine these things and just figure out what drums sounded like what by watching that video on repeat. I would watch him do a drum fill and realize that, this drum sounded like that, this drum sounded like that, whatever, the snare drum is this, how does he start the double bass run in the song one, like what foot, what even is it, so I would have to tap out the foot patterns with my hands to try to be able to even think about doing them with my feet. It was a next to impossible task at the time, and just when you're young, the barriers aren't there. There isn't this burden of knowledge that you kind of get when you're old and realize how much work has to go in something to learn it. It's almost just like you blindly kind of pursue these things as a young person, and regardless of the amount of work that has to go in, achieving the goal is the utmost importance, and that's the glory. And I even think back to, I was air drumming, and, I didn't have drumsticks, and I had toothbrushes. And I just think back to even thinking, at some point I'm going to have to play long concerts. So what I have to do now is, develop calluses. And I would play air drums until my hands bled, literally. And, the calluses eventually ended up building up, over time. I'm sure a lot of people have that, but this is just these things I was just determined to kind of make my way through, just in the hope to be able to, play through an album like this and perhaps someday play on stage myself. So influence of this and seeing this, and, my imagination was kind of blown wide open at that time with possibility and where things could go, it was a cool. There's another interesting thing I just noticed looking at it, and I remember specifically looking at this. This was an album that I spent a lot of time looking at the credits of, and I knew nothing about drums at this point. And if you look at the bottom, you can see that there's a listing of equipment that these guys all used, and so that was I don't remember ever seeing that. Not that I looked that closely probably at any album's credits before this, but it was very cool. This is how I learned in the music video, and this is how I learned about Tama, Zildjian, Regal Tip. I didn't even know what Regal Tip was until I got a copy of Modern Drummer. I couldn't even put two and two together that it was a drumstick brand, even though there's a drumstick in the eye. It never occurred to me. I was probably looking at the CD print, and it was much, much smaller. So, and then Remo, finding out they were drum heads, it's just the amount of things I learned, just about music and about not so much production at this time, but it was very interesting because this was such a different sounding record than what I was really, really used to. And seeing at the time, just how bands kind of worked. The credits actually break down quite a bit, about what is the goings on behind a band, and you don't get a lot of that anymore. They have the driver listed on this record, you know what I mean? They kind of had maybe small enough crew, or they could give everybody some credit at the time. But they really laid out the kind of goings on behind this album. Perhaps it's because they did do like a double album, and they had enough space to warrant putting this stuff on there. If you only have one album, it's like you're fighting for room for everything on there. So who knows? But and yeah, it's such a cool, very very iconic like image of Metallica at that time, and the history behind this album is. These guys talk about it, where it's just like if you release an album and 40 years later people are still talking about it, it's like, oh, even whatever you think of the production, whatever you think of the lack of bass, it's like just the fact people still talk about this 40 years later is a testament to something went right with it, based on like the strength of the songs, or just Metallica's trajectory at the time. Like they were just off into the stratosphere. At this point, no radio play per se, and the video, one video and not a ton of airplay likely for that either in the grand scheme of things. They get to the Black Album and it's a whole different story, but this is still predating that. So, but as far as influence and wow, it's like a time capsule just thinking about all these things with this album, and the times I had listening to it and dissecting it. Just dissecting is a good word, because there's not too many albums I can recall where I would literally repeat. I had a CD player. I could program a repetitive section so I could pick a part of the song to repeat it over and over again, and I would do that quite often, just trying to learn a part, like a drum fill. I remember Harvester of Sorrow, over and over again. Probably drove everybody in my house crazy trying to figure it out, but I didn't even have a drum set, so it's like I'm just trying to in my mind, just even figuring out how it goes and what drum to hit to get the right interlude between the notes and follow the guitars and stuff. And yeah, what an album. However, Metallica fans feel about it, it's definitely, it's up there. A lot of people say this was the last great one. I disagree. There's been some great albums. They're definitely different. I mean, you can't, people change and bands change, and I've always loved that about Metallica, is that, Master Puppets into this is kind of the only time they really didn't change or adopt a new style. You almost get a different band every time you get a new Metallica record for a long time, which I always really admired about the band. So, I mean, in a way, you can, like, this is Master Puppets 2.0, and whatever it is. Obviously, the band, they had some tough times in between Master Puppets and this album, and but yeah, it's there's some amazing songs on here. If you haven't heard this, I encourage you to check it out for sure. But like the easiest song to find on here is One, the single, the video. Like Harvester of Sorrow is such an amazing song. I just recently did a cover of Dyer's Eve, which was a growing up, a high watermark of drumming. There was the drummers of this time were all kind of chasing each other in their ability, and Lars famously said he always felt kind of inadequate against Dave Lombardo and Charlie Benante and these guys. And Dyer's Eve is a pretty good attempt to keep up with those guys, but like there's so many interesting stories behind this album. The way they made it, how it's engineered, the processes that went into it. The behind the scenes is quite fascinating, and it's easy to find the history of that stuff now, which is cool. But piecing that stuff together through all the magazines I used to read as a kid was always there's always little tidbits of information about it, which were always nice to find. So, but yeah, as far as influence goes, this was kind of like the album that I heard that inspired me to pick up drums in the first place, and cemented Metallica as my favorite band, and gave me something to kind of aspire to and to follow. And these guys should be admired for their tenacity. You know, there's not many bands that have gotten to a place where these guys are doing what they wanted to do. And say what you want, it's like clearly these guys have always been able to do what they want. And if you can do that in a band and attain success like these guys have, that's rarefied air. And yeah, there's a reason why they're still going, and they still are one of the biggest bands on the planet. So this is the one about And Justice for All from Metallica. Cheers.